Hello and welcome back. So finally, after months and months of the layout being out of action, as you can see, we've got the fiddle yard all in, all connected back up, and now's the time to get all the rolling stock that we packed up in the previous end of the line video and get it all back out up on the layout and back into running motion again. I'm not a fan of unboxing videos, but I thought for this one we'll go through each piece of rolling stock and unbox it all individually. So here we go, getting the Class 47 back out again, and I thought I'd just slow it down slowly, and also as well get the dramatic music rolling. Anyway, that's enough of that. So moving on, after months and months of preparation and getting the fiddle yard in and installed, finally managed to get all the stock out. It's all back onto the fiddle yard, and everything has been vigorously tested over the last few weeks just to make sure that all the rolling stock negotiated every single piece of track work, and making sure there was no running issues anywhere. And finally we've managed to sort of nail it basically, and it's all in and runs faultlessly. There are some bits of wiring still to complete in the fiddle yard area, but for the very best, most of it's done, and we can finally get on and actually enjoy the layout. So moving on, I thought in this video I was going to put together an overall track plan of the whole layout now that everything has been completed. This is something I've been asked on several occasions, and something which I have done a few years ago, which will show you the original track plan before we did away with Lara and built everything that you see here now. Before we go into that, it's just worth noting that the layout itself, when I first popped my head up into this loft space and come up with the idea of wanting to build a layout, the first thing I had in mind was just to build extra St David's. So the track plan that we're about to see is actually pretty close to what I originally designed, without the Lara side, which was obviously later introduced. And the only reason I added that into it is because I got more and more into the scrap-based weathering, a bit of a fascination into obviously lots of locomotives and rolling stock that were withdrawn, and I wanted to add that scrap line element somewhere into the layout. So at the time, Lara seemed the obvious choice, as it was kind of quite close to the same region that I was modelling with St David's, and then the track plan was dramatically changed, and obviously that's where we saw that element of Lara added in. So before we go into a complete route demonstration, what we're going to do is just have a quick look over the fiddle yard and the new bridging section, which connects the end of the fiddle yard into the north end of Exeter. And as we're aware in the previous video that I did, the fiddle yard boards themselves were just made up of 2 foot by 4 foot modular sections. These have all been fixed along a route of L girder beams, keep everything dead straight, and the bridging section along the back was just done again with the L girder beams as an open frame style. So this is an elevated track deck just to span the width of the loft without any necessary legs anywhere. Okay, so the layout itself operates on almost 3 loops. We'll go into more detail onto the actual 3rd loop, because that one doesn't orbit the loft all the way around and has a special purpose on how that actually operates, and we'll demonstrate that sort of later on in this video. So basically we've got 2 main running loops which orbit the loft all the way around. Each of those loops has 4 tracks, so that gives me 8 storage lines for those 2 main running loops. The 3rd loop, which obviously isn't a complete loop, has another 4 lines there, so the fiddle yard's actually made up of 12 lanes in total. So to get a good demonstration and an idea of how this operates, what we're going to do is we're going to send a train out of the Fiddle yard. So we're going to focus on the class 47, which will be a westbound service. So this would have come from the direction of London Paddington, but also as well this would also be trains that would be coming down from the north of England, so Scotland would also sort of be coming from this direction. So with the 47 heading off, we leave the Fiddle yard and we head over the bridging section which spans the width of the loft, and this negotiates this particular part of the track deck before heading round quite shallow curve here. So I've stuck with third and fourth radiuses on the main curves, and then it enters into the scenic section or the north end of Exeter. Once it's done its little stop in the station area and picked up a few passengers and dropped a few off, it will then depart and then head out Exeter, the West End, which it then heads through the station exit, crosses over the bridge or the River Exe, and then heads out through the back scene where it enters into the non-scenic part of the layout. Just negotiates this little S-bend just behind, just obviously chimneys and building structures often get in the way, so we have to negotiate our model railways around things like that. And then once it's done that section along there, just comes back around the curve and then finds its route back through into the Fiddle yard, exactly where it started from. So with the direction of that particular train, so that would have been, like I say, a Paddington to Penzance service. And what we're going to do now is just demonstrate using the newly acquired Hornby HST, and we're going to send that out on a pretty much a northbound service. So pretty much the same as what we saw with the Class 47, the HST does exactly the same, but obviously in the opposite direction. So that finds its route out onto the main lines from its spot on the Fiddle yard. Runs along through the back of the behind the back scene area before crossing over the river section and heading into the station. Again, once that's done its business in the station, picking up and dropping off some passengers, that will then obviously exit out and onward bound on its journey, whether that be the north of England or off to London Paddington. And again, straight into the Fiddle yard, where it will head back into its spot where it started from. So the good thing with these two loops is that each loop itself actually obviously has the 4 lines in the Fiddle yard, so that's 8 sections of storage that we have there just for those 2 running loops. So that part of the layout itself is actually, I suppose, the most simple part to operate. It's just a case of setting the point, selecting the train that you want to send out, and then that can do a loop all the way around the loft as many times as you like until you return it back to the Fiddle yard and swap trains and put something else out onto the main lines. What we're going to do now is we're going to focus on the other loop, which isn't quite a loop, and we'll give a demonstration on that one, which is a little bit more in terms of control and being sort of alert of which trains are actually out on this section here. So this is going to be the services that will be the sort of Waterloo to Exeter and sort of back again type services. So we're looking obviously the southwest of England route. So what we got in the station at the moment is a Class 50, and we've got this one parked up at the moment on platform 1, and we're going to send this train out on a London Waterloo bound service. So for this, what we're going to do is send this one up the incline, so heading up the 1 in 37, where the train then passes just over the Bonhay Road section, just before heading into the tunnel. So at the real location, the train would, once exits the tunnel, would normally come into Exeter Central before going onward bound to London Waterloo. On the layout itself, what we've done is a very short section of the tunnel before it comes back out into a non-scenic area just above the entrance area to the Fiddle Yard, where it does a full return loop on itself using second radius track, which works perfectly fine with all the backman coaches closely coupled, and doubles back on itself and then goes round, heads back down the incline before coming back into selected platforms, either 1 or 3 at Exeter St David's. So we're going to bring this one in on platform 3, and again this is now a terminating service, so this train would have come from London Waterloo, stopped at the station where it then terminates. So this is where the operation now becomes quite interesting and moves into, I suppose, the further prototypical aspects of St David's. Once this train's obviously terminated and everyone's left the coaches, the train's then shuttled out into New Yard, which is just outside Exeter St David's, further down the line, just behind where the brewery building actually is. There's a set of sidings there where the train would shunt off into there. So what we do is, for that movement, the actual train itself is just sent off into the first 4 lanes of the Fiddle Yard itself. Typically at the real location, the loco would then either uncouple, run round, couple back up to the front of the coaches, or in some instances it would actually completely uncouple from the train, and it would head through the station before heading behind the station for where all the fueling area is to refuel the engine itself before returning back to New Yard just to collect the coaches. Now the Fiddle Yard itself has been set up so one of those lanes are always kept clear for enabling me to uncouple the loco once it's in the Fiddle Yard and run it round to couple it back up, and as you can see here, which then does the return trip and brings the train itself back in onto platform number 1. So once that train's obviously entered into platform number 1, passengers will hop onto the train, and then that train would be a return service back to London Waterloo, using obviously the same route as we saw at the beginning of this clip. Now we're going to move into another movement as well, which would be a London Waterloo to Paignton service. So again, the train does exactly the same as what we saw before. It obviously comes back down the 1 in 37 and enters into platform number 3. Whilst the train was actually in the station, it would uncouple from its coaches, and the engine itself would run round and then head back to the front of the train where it would couple back up to the opposite end. This is where the Fiddle Yard itself now comes in useful at the other end, and the train now will head out of the station, crosses over the River Exe, and then onward bound to the English Riviera, so Paignton, Torquay, that sort of destination. So again, just doing the route using the actual mainline loops, or the inner mainline loop, head behind the back scene, and then enters the Fiddle yard, where it's got its own turnout where we can actually come in and actually join those first 4 lanes of the beginning of the Fiddle yard area. So got the ability then just to bring that train into an empty slot just there. Again, once the train's done its movement there, we can uncouple the engine, and then we can either couple another one back up to the front or use that same loco, again just running it round, connecting it back up, and then we send the train back out again, and that does its route in reverse using obviously the incorrect line, but it's still typically on the correct line as it would be at the real location. So that's basically the layout in its full operational glory. Nothing too complicated, works wonders, and this was, as I say, pretty similar to the track plan which I first come up with before I chucked the Lara side into the mix basically. Quite a fun and enjoyable layout to operate, and everything that we got here is pretty prototypical to the movement to the real location. But I think for that kind of hopefully answers a few people's questions on what the actual track plan was, and gives you an idea of how it all operates. So with the track plan aside, we're going to take a look at some of the new and existing rolling stock. Not really done much in way of sort of like rolling stock updates at all really on the channel, so I think generally for the stuff that's been seen has been in running sessions, so it'd be nice to sort of have a look through exactly what we got and what we've acquired more recently as well. So coming out first, what we got is the Class 47, which is Windsor Castle, and this hauls my Mark IIF stock, which is me typical stuff from London Paddington. This is nothing new and has obviously featured in various videos before. The loco itself isn't one of the correct ones, and I did pick this up as quite a nice cheap bargain off of eBay. So the loco itself does need a little bit of work just to get it so it's correct. The executive band on the bottom should actually be white and not the executive grey colour. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with the loco yet, whether I'm going to change its identity totally or just correct that white band. The Mark IIF stock is just a mix of the executive and blue-grey stuff, running as a 7-coach train. Moving on to the next one, we have this is quite a fairly new rake actually, which was put together whilst the layout was out of operation, and one I've been dying to get up and running was the parcels train. Now I picked up this parcel livery Class 47 by Bachmann, Sir Rowland Hill, which again was a very common sight at Exeter St David's, and the coaches, being a 7-coach train which will eventually be increased to possibly 9, consist of 2 res liveried full BGs. We also have the selection of the British Rail Blue GUVs as well, and on the rear of the train we have the sort of Royal Mail livery one and another plain blue parcels full brakes as well. These have all been subject of, some of them have been repainted. The roofs obviously, attention to detail on those. The rest ones I've kept them relatively clean as they were pretty much quite a new livery in the early 90s, more sort of, I think it was around about October 91 I think that particular livery was introduced, so tried to lay off the heavy weathering of those, whereas the other ones kind of a typical sight of what they were during this period, all sort of run down and battered and filthy. Obviously Sir Rowland Hill needs a bit of weathering as well, so that'll be something that will be taken off the layout and put onto the weathering bench in the future. So next up we've got a fairly, I suppose this has been a loco I've had for quite a while, but hasn't actually seen much use on the layout. This is a Dutch liveried Bachmann Class 37, and this one was originally 37046, I think it was, subject to a renumber, and did that as 37010, which was another common site at Exeter St David's, and subject to a weathering project that I did for the Hornby Magazine's virtual exhibition. So that was sort of weathered up about a year and a half ago, and then sent off to Hornby Magazine for a few photos before eventually finding its way back again. So that one's now back out of its box and onto the layout, and this hauls my ballast train. So that's made up of a mixture of Bachmann and Hornby sea cows and sea lions, with a couple of Helgian dogfish and the ballast shark as well. So all my ballast wagons, they contain the ballast loads, so all fitted with those, and I did a quick video on those a little while ago, so if anyone's interested on how to get the loads into those, you can always check back through some of my videos, and you might find that one there. So up next we got the Speedlink train, which is made up of a mixture of all sorts of rolling stock that was quite typical down in the western regions. Hauled by the Triple Grey Class 37, Tree, Paul and Pen. Again, that was a regular visitor down that region. And the first leading wagons we got of these are the Clay Tiger wagons. 3 of these are the fairly new EFE versions, and one of them was originally a blue Tippuk version, which I repainted before EFE decided to get hold of that old tooling that Kerno did and re-release them. The train's also made up of Kerno's PRA wagons, which are the hooded clays. Also 2 of the box vans, VGA style vans, and the VDAs as well. To finish the back end of that train, there's also a couple of the Helgian cargo wagon vehicles as well. One of them is currently off the layout, having a bit of work done to it, and there will be introduction of more pieces of rolling stock for the Speedlink stuff, so I can swap and change various pieces of rolling stock out of those. So next up, and definitely one that's been really long awaited, was the HST. That's an absolute must-have, certainly for most regions, even more so. They were common down this neck of the woods. This has been something I kind of built up gradually over the last sort of year or so. The coaches I picked up with Hornby's last release, so they were all kind of purchased and put into storage until I actually managed to get my hands on the power cars as well. Sadly, Hornby, they released the buffered versions in the last load of releases, which is not something that I wanted. I wanted the full valance. So these popped up for sale on Facebook, a reasonably decent price as well, so I was quite quick to actually snap up those power cars. They've not had the greatest weathering effects applied, so that's something which will I'll address at some point quite soon, with some decent weathering on those. Again, it's a great runner, and certainly something which is an enjoyment now to see finally going around the layout. So moving on to my southwest of England services, we have the 2 rakes of the Mark IIA coaches from Bachmann, which make up for the 2 trains I use on the sort of services in and out of Exeter to Waterloo. The first rake is 7 coaches, and the second one currently is only 6. We're 1 coach short, but I'm looking at towards getting the Mercura Scale Mark II-Bs when they eventually get released. So I've got one that's going to be made up as a full Network Southeast rake, and the other rake's just made up generally of just a mixed bag that you typically see with your blue-grey thrown in for good luck. Again, these are pretty much the longest coaches I've actually had in possession, and only a very small handful of them have actually been weathered, so something which I'm desperate to get off the layout and address the dark blue back into a light blue, which was more commonly seen on these type of coaches, and get some much needed weathering over these. So next up we take a look at the locomotives that we use for all the southwest of England stock, and first up I think we'll have a look at the Class 50s that we got. So first one we got is 50046 Ajax, which is a regular workhorse on the layout, and obviously been in many pictures and videos, and weathered pretty much to the state and condition that it was seen through the last days of its life. So now we move on to the second one of my collection of Class 50s, and we have 50029 Renown. So this one is actually pretty much the first locomotive I picked up well in advance before building the layout, and one that was subject to a weathering project that I did earlier on in some of my very early days of videoing for YouTube. Now I did reference this picture from or this particular loco from various pictures that were taken of it during the winter months, so it was quite a grubby looking loco, which was kind of something which I quite liked at the time, but actually doesn't really fit with the summertime scene, as Renown was quite a clean loco. Future plans for this one is to actually take the body shell off. I've already had a go at cleaning back some of the weathering, and some of it's quite stubborn, so it's more than likely going to find itself end up having a bit of a respray sometime in the not too distant future. And the third one of the last of the final three hard-working locos is 50030 Repulse. This is one I've kind of been dying to get my hands on for some time. I've actually had the engine itself for probably a good few months, sat on the side sort of waiting for the weathering and detailing to be added to that loco. This one's recently been completed, still minus its nameplates at the moment, and reference from a great bundle of pictures which captured the loco again in its full glory of different coloured cabs, dark blue where they've been repainted, where the rest of the loco is in the light blue shade of Network Southeast, and again all the other tones and colouring added exactly the same as we saw on the real thing. So the final Class 50 we got here, which is 50033, was a subject of a renumber from one of the early models again. Picked out in all its full glorious detail and immaculate condition, as this was one of three of the tour locomotives that made up the farewell tours. So the last two locomotives that we have currently on the southwest of England route are two Class 47s. So we have one in the ex-ScotRail livery 706, which again was another common sight down at Exeter in its full battered condition. The only downside about this particular model is the airbrush happy finish that the factory seemed to give these, which tends to ruin the model, and you can't really see the detailing that's been printed onto the body sides. So that's again another weathering bench project that we'll tackle sometime soon. My more recent purchase was this one from Bachmann's 701, which is Old Oak Common in Network Southeast, and absolutely stunning loco, and probably at the moment one of the favourites on the whole layout. This one is going to be subject to some very, very light weathering, as I kind of don't want this one to be too grubby looking, as it's quite a stunning model. And one thing I am quite short of on the terms of the rolling stock on the layout is actually DMUs, something which I've not really spent much time or focus on picking up various models over the last few years, but I do have a Bachmann 108. It's one of the earlier models, and fairly nice model. Again, makes a fairly regular appearance in previous videos and has been just lightly weathered just to give it its prototypical appearance. To finish up on the rolling stock, there are 2 new trains in the making currently at the moment, and one of those being a second engineer's train. Again, one of my locomotives which has made an appearance on the layout several times over is my Dutch liveried Class 33. This one's going to be hauling quite possibly either the sea cow rake, which will be double-headed, or it may join a second engineer's train, which is going to be made up as a, I suppose, a bit of an all-sorts type train. That one's work in the making at the moment, so we'll update that one once that rake's completely finished, and certainly looking forward to getting that one out. Finally, something else which I've also got in the making is something that was seen regularly from the Forley to Tavistock Junction, which was the fuel trains basically. So these were made up of all the TTA tanks, and I plan to have up to around about 25 TTA tanks being hauled by a Class 47, and I've actually got the engine in mind, which is kind of ideal for my type of weathering. So that's another one that will be making an appearance sometime quite soon. But I think for now that kind of really does conclude all the rolling stock. There are bits and pieces that I've got aside at the moment which haven't been shown, and but as I say, we'll update those as of when we've got the full trains up and running. I'll be back again soon with another video, probably be taking a look at the Exeter North. I want to return back to that because it's been a long time since I've done some work to that area, and it's in dire need of finishing touches, as well as Bonhay Road. We continue with the work above the tunnel area, and looking at some of the areas just around the entrance to the station at the west end as well. So as always guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again soon.